have like weird windy intestines, you have throat stuff, and that's all kind of like tube like. And you get to the stomach, it's like this organ thing.
Right.
And then you go like down out of the stomach and you get like poop tubes. Right?
Could I ask you to get better lighting?
You can, and I will attempt to grab some. Just had to turn on one of the 8 lights in my basement.
Thank
If
you.
you remember the panel of 8 light switches that is down here,
Yeah,
yeah, come over soon.
I do. But anywho, back to this discussion at hand.
Yes.
So, obviously, so
So
let's to recap.
so to recapitulate,
We have we start with the solo cup.
you start with the solo cup.
It has a big hole, and you
It
can
has
like
one
drink out
hole,
of. And if you were to poke a small hole in the bottom, we both agree that that's two separate holes.
two separate holes, because I would say that the varying thickness of it, because of like the pinhole width of the one hole and the big girth of the other hole, there's the disparity of like saying, oh, this hole starts here, that hole starts there. And you can
Mm-hmm.
tell there's a clear difference. If I were to dig a hole down into the earth and I would stop, and there's like this big divot in the earth, and then I were to climb down that and dig a smaller hole directly down, I would say that's two holes. You have your big hole and then
Be-
your small hole that
because there's
starts down
too
here.
much difference between the two holes.
Yeah, there's too much of a difference to deny there being. You could argue that it's just the hole continues down and there's a divot. But I would say you could make an argument for both, but I'm on the side of that's two different holes.
Interesting. Okay.
I would say
See that
that
now,
was
okay.
just distinct sections of hole.
Now this can possibly aid us in the problem of the human, because as we said before, the mouth and the ass are both just one long hole.
Mhm.
That as I said, you could eat a nickel and it will go straight through.
Because your stomach acid can't digest a nickel.
So it will go straight through, as if you put a nickel through a straw.
A really big straw.
Yeah, but still.
Hmm. A
Then
really windy straw.
now, could we say, in your thing with the Earth, the big hole and the small hole continuing through the Earth, does the and you were saying that the big hole and the small hole are too different to be the same hole? Does that mean that the mouth and the anus are they too different to be the same hole?
I would say so.
Because obviously they are nowhere near in the same qualities.
Precisely. So even if somehow the human body worked to the point where you have intestines like all the way down and it just gets slowly digested all the way down your long string of intestines and you had no stomach. You have no stomach, it's just long intestines and
Why does
in
the
the
stomach throw you off?
because okay, the stomach is for me is an anchor of like difference because your intestines stop and it goes or
Well, no, it just goes. It starts tube here, goes
yeah.
down, and then the tube balloons a little bit, and then it keeps going.
There's like stuff in there. It's organ like. It's not very tube like.
Well, there's a lot of. If you were to go to
When
the
it goes,
molecular scale, I'm sure a straw is very different. It's all bumpy here and soft there. I mean, I'm sure a straw changes as does our intestines change. So I don't think that. So we can't say a straw. Or what about a bendy straw? Or what about like a fun straw that has wrinkles in it and stuff? Like, you know, we can't look at a weird straw and go that's not a straw because it obviously is a straw.
hmm, hmm, hmm.
I mean, so I think the stomach is just a continuation of the human straw. It can't not
Okay.
be.
So, okay, then my point remains that the mouth being as it is and the butthole being as it is, there's enough of a definite difference to say this is section 1, this is section 2. And
So
I
is
would
that
say
two? So we're saying that's two different holes.
I would say these are two different holes. And I would argue stomach is another section. Where, we're talking about sectioned off holes, right?
Now, in these sections of holes, are there multiple holes in the section of holes? Because obviously the mouth is a hole, but then you get to the stomach, and that is broken up by one of the things that blocks your stomach, like stuff going up.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the
Well, if
name
you have
is.
a little flap in your straw, does that mean that the straw isn't a straw?
Okay? We all know what a valve is. Is a valve a straw? Because it's a section of
It's
pipe
just
and with
a
a
straw
valve
with
in
a
it,
lid.
and then you can turn it one way and it will stop. So does that make
Hmm.
two separate holes? If you were to take a valve and close it, and that creates a
Hmm.
barrier between the pipe, do you have two sections of pipe and thus two different
So that would go
pieces?
back to the drilling into the straw. So if you have your solid tube and you drill halfway in and you drill halfway in, you have two separate holes at this point, right?
So
You
if you do
know,
that, you can both agree that you have two holes.
you have two holes, yes. There's one hole in here, one hole in there, and then there's just a barrier in between. What if you could freely take that barrier in and out? Because if it's in, there's obviously two holes. But if you take it out, then that's our problem,
This is a
our
problem.
ambiguity. I would say, in order for, okay, because here's the thing. Let's say you do have your big old straw, and you have it drilled halfway through, and you have your valve that you can shut it off, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily have to be there, right? If imagine if it's not halfway through and your valve is like over here, that's still one hole over here, two holes over here, and you can move that around, and it's still one hole, and it's just two holes. But if you remove the valve completely, that's where our problem is. So I would say it's one hole. Say one hole until you add a valve, and then that's two separate holes if it's blocking out. Because no matter where you move it,
That's two
it'll
still holes. They're like
there's
two.
two holes on
Yeah.
either side. So it's like, what if you like slide the valve all the way off? Like if it's at the very end of our tube, and you'd say, oh yeah, there would be one hole on one side of the valve, right?
Right.
So then if you have it all the way on the end and the other end of the valve is just facing out into the world, is
Right.
there would be one hole at the end. So it's one hole.
I don't like this.
This is it's supposed to be an infuriating kind of debate
And
because, like I said at the beginning, there really is no right answer.
but there has to be a right answer. This
It's
isn't
not.
this isn't like science. This isn't science that's like there are certain things in the universe that can't directly be answered for one reason or another, or the answer or this gets down to the whole of like quantum physics and like chance and reality, and is a clock actually moving if nobody's looking at the clock? Like nobody knows.
I would say obviously yes. Clock
But
is moving if nobody's looking at it.
if
The mechanicals would work in a
you
way
would
that even
think
you can't be sure, but I
you
would argue that it is.
nobody can prove that a clock is operating if nobody's looking at it.
You can argue that for anything. I could say, yeah, the light upstairs no. The house above me could not exist, and I wouldn't know because I'm not looking at it.
Right.
You could take it to a logical extreme. I could say, hey, your mom doesn't exist because I'm not looking at her. That is a product of I'll only believe it if I see it, which is a very
It this
pragmatic kind of view.
this goes back to another theory that I always I'm troubled with, and that is, do you exist when I am not either A, talking to you, or B, when I see you out and about? How am I so sure, or how am I so sure you're a real person? Either
Well,
you're not
that
just
would
some
be
robot. That when I see you, yeah, you're as what I know as you, and then you like go home and then sit in your closet and like deactivate.
now that would be a like protagonist syndrome where it's like, yes, the world revolves around me. So if you would be like, no, you don't, that would be like a protagonist kind of syndrome where it's like the
Right.
world revolves around me. No one is doing anything unless I'm interacting with them,
Right.
which is an inherently flawed view of the world. There is,
Well,
hold on, I
yes.
know there's a name for it when um Sonder, yes. Sonder is the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own.
And on a
So,
logical basis,
so
we
you
all
know, a
know this.
life, yeah. So a life without Sonder is is a fairy tale. A life without Sonder is you're the only person that really matters. Everyone else's life doesn't exist because you're not interacting with them.
Right.
A random person out in like Asia isn't real because you're not talking to them and you're not interacting with them. That is a
Right.
life without Sonder. But if you're like each person has their own life, um, then yeah,
And we
because
I don't
because
humans aren't born with this innately. Because
no, that's why
I
it's called the
remember
realization.
yeah, I remember the distinct moment that it clicked for me. Now, up to this point, I knew I like if you told me like, or if you asked me, "Hey, does that guy live a life over there?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course he does." But I remember the distinct moment when it clicked for me. I was sitting at this stop light, turning left, and there was a truck pretty similar to the truck that I was currently in at the opposite of me that was also turning left. And I looked at that truck, and it occurred to me in that moment. Just I don't know why it was then, but because the truck, I think it's because the trucks were similar, and that we're both doing the same activity, turning left, waiting to turn left at this light. It occurred to me that guy came from doing something else, is now turning left, waiting, and looking back at me. And thinking this, and possibly could be thinking the same thing about me. What did I do today?
Right.
And it just, I don't know. I don't know why that was so just, but ever since, like,
Sonder.
it just happened.
Yeah,
I was like,
that's Sonder.
I was like 10. Do you remember?
I don't. I think it was a slow realization, but just because I interacted with so many people on a daily basis because I talk a lot. I don't know if you noticed that. I
Hmm.
talk a lot. I find it hard not to talk. I have to force myself not to. I have to
It's
force myself
fun.
to like I have to force myself to shut up sometimes. The reason I realized that is because we had guests over and I talked the entire time, and they didn't get to say almost a thing
Oh
because
gosh.
I was just talking the whole time. And then my mom pointed it out, and I'm like, and I felt really bad. And then they came over like 2 weeks
You
later,
didn't talk at all.
not a word, and they're like, "Wow, you're awfully quiet." I'm like, "Yeah, I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to talk because, you guys didn't get to talk last time." And they're like, we really enjoyed your random stories. I mean, you can go ahead. I was like, really? And they're like, yes. So I was like 12, so I wanted to tell everyone everything.
Right.
Can you imagine me as a 12-year-old?
God, that'd be awful.
Oh my, I was a really annoying child. I'm surprised I had friends
Does a
because I would just,
straw have two
yeah,
holes?
we got off topic, but I think it was an important deviation. And then you like vigorously threw us back on course. How did we get to that topic of
We were
conversation?
talking about we were talking about if a clock still functions when nobody's looking at it.
Oh yeah, and then I
I don't
yeah.
believe they do.
You don't think that
I have a clock
okay, so
right back there.
so
That right there is my alarm clock. Right past
mhm,
the
the old
deodorant.
space.
That is my alarm clock.
Hmm.
And it I know it very well. It's one of those red segmented ones. And that could be off. That could that could be just nothing right now. Until I turn around and look at it. And make and then the universe
So yeah,
makes it function right as
yeah. So
I
that
look at
was
it.
going to be my follow-up question was what makes it function in that moment?
Nobody
Because if
knows.
it wasn't functioning before, why is it functioning now? You could say because we're in a simulation and that's how it works.
I don't think we're in a simulation.
You don't. There's
No.
technically no way to prove that we're
No, there's
not.
not. And this could be just a very realistic game of Sims. But
True. It can also be. Have you heard of Last Tuesday or Last Thursdayism?
I have, and I very much enjoy it.
It's an unprovable theory.
But
It
it's
is
not.
a
But
hundred.
you can't
You can
unprove
well,
it.
you can't disprove it. It's 100% disprove it. 100%. You can't disprove it. There's no way to disprove it, but there's also no way to prove it
Which is
either.
the upsetting part. But that's a whole different
Yeah.
thing.
Hmm.
I believe. No, I don't seriously believe. But if I were to indulge myself into believing, I like the idea that I like to think that the idea that when I'm on a phone call that has no face to face, when I'm on a phone call with somebody,
Hmm.
that's not actually them. That is a simulation of their voice of a computer emulating their voice so perfectly that I can't disprove it.
Right.
I like to believe that because I don't know. That's kind, that's the kind of person I am. I think it's just interesting to think about. But do I
Right.
actually like believe it? No, no, I don't. Of course,
Here's one thing. To take that to its logical extreme, I could be not talking to you right now.
this could be a video.
Maybe it could be a video. It could be a really good AI interpretation of your face and your facial expressions and what you would
Mhm.
say and like your voice recorded, and then just fed through an algorithm thrown onto Discord and I'm talking to it.
Right.
I don't think AI is obviously not advanced enough to do that, as far as I know. It's not. Oh, what if it was?
But what if it was? I don't like make my brain hurt. But back to straws.
Yes, back to straws. When are
So
we gonna agree that we just can't know?
I mean,
When because you can make a valid argument for both sides.
yeah, you can because there's never a point where okay, there is a handful of scenarios that one could say that one could look and go, yes, that is one or two holes. For example, a hole, as in like a red solo cup, that is a hole. That is just one hole, right? Because there's no other hole. There's no second hole in the cup,
Yeah,
and it's
unless you
just
punch
one
a hole.
opening. We can all agree that is one hole. That is a definite in our whole science. That is provable.
Right. Okay, here's one interesting thing that I will note is that I've always noted that like if you cut off the bottom of the cup, that's one hole. But there are times where you can punch a hole into a cup and definitely only make a second hole, and there's no way to make into one hole. And that is if you punch a hole into the side of the cup. That's 2 holes. For sure.
Well, that is obviously 2 holes. Well, no. You could say that that's just a macaroni, where the hole starts here and it bends over here.
It could, but what's all the stuff over
It
here?
would just fill up with water until it hits that point, and it would start spilling over. That would just be that there's an engineering term. That's some kind of, that's some kind of thing, right? Where there's a threshold where you can leak that much water, the cup will fill up until that much, and then it'll spill over. So it would be some kind of macaroni pipe. Just it has a extra little bit that it will allow to fill up to a degree.
So what we're saying is, there are methods to make. So just right there, we've now proven that even in a situation in which you would think, oh, obviously that's 2 holes, you can construct into it being 1.
Yes.
You can
Any
do that
2 holes can be
connected somehow.
If the holes share their volume with each other, then those 2 holes can be connected to 1 hole. That is another definite in our
the same volume.
They share the same volume, as in like a straw. If you were to take the 2 holes but they're not connected, and then you remove that barrier, they share the same volume, right? They overlap, and then thus they're sharing the same volume.
I see. Okay. And then I can go back to my thing of, but what if you move the valve around? Right?
Precisely.
So, I think this only further proves that it just depends on the beholder of the object, whether there's a hole or if there are 2 holes.
I want
to look through the straw.
I want to make a scientific paper on this. And I would like to find the definitions. Because I'm taking geometry, and this is the only word I know to define it. But like in geometry, you have postulates. It says, and a postulate in geometry would be if there are any 2 lines or any 2 dots, those 2 dots, there's a line in between them, because that is just it's true.
Right.
It's a postulate. So, or like a law of science. The first law of whole science is, what was the first law? If there is only 1 opening, that is and there are no other holes connected, that is only 1 hole. Right? So the first law of whole science is a red Solo cup is 1 hole.
Oh, hold on. Just do it quickly. My mom opened the ironing board and it makes a horrifying shrieking sound every single time.
Does it now?
She says all ironing boards do.
I've never opened an ironing board, so I wouldn't know.
You've never opened an ironing board? Have you ever been around when an ironing board has been opened?
No. I've been around when somebody has ironed before.
But then they open it up and it goes... Never?
Nope.
Wow. I envy you.
But also, I'm not often around a thing that needs to be ironed. But, so then the second law of whole science would be, if 2 holes share the same volume, they turn into the same hole?
Yeah, I would say so. Then that becomes just 1 hole. And then Yeah, that if two holes share the same space, that's one hole.
Yes, and our example is if you take a red Solo cup and poke a hole in it, then it becomes one hole. It becomes a
Yeah.
macaroni.
And even if you poke it into the side,
Hmm.
it you can construe it as one hole.
What is another definite law of holes? Um, th- those are the two obvious ones.
Those are the two obvious ones. And well, I think the second one is a bit tricky because it's hard to get a handle on.
Well,
Because it can
you
be
just
like,
have to do it. You just have to do it as an example with a physical cup. Because if I were to teach this class holes 101, and I'm Professor Sunderland, I could easily do the demonstration easily because
yes,
you would just
but
pour water into it until it
only because we've
leaks.
walked through it, right?
Yes.
But because if you haven't walked through it, if you haven't gone through the logical steps of like, oh, what if I put a hole here? It's still one hole. It's sharing the same thing. Because you haven't taken that leap, it's hard to take to get it right. So if we hypothetically debate this with someone else, you'd have to do that whole logical process again.
The same that you would have to do with any law of science. You have to sit down and explain to them how and why.
overtly Christian stuff, and
We're good to keep talking.
you know,
Yeah, although I do have to go in like 2 seconds because I'm watching stuff.
Mm.
interesting tears.
So, like any law of science, like a law of motion or whatever, like you would have to sit down and explain to somebody why that works, and it's only intuitive because we've been taught it, and it makes sense, just like our macaroni hole.
Right, macaroni.
Girls collapsing.
It's a yeah, it's a difficult concept to think about, but once you think about it once,
It makes
then
sense.
yeah,
This
Hmm.
whole
We need more of these laws of holes.
yes. Here, let me write them down right here. I'm gonna put laws of holes.
Just have this discussion board
The first law of hole science.
tonight. It's like
Laws of hole
I want to start out this one here.
is.
This is the most intense I've ever thought about this. I've thought about it before, but by golly, not this far.
So what's law number one?
Law number 1. The title of it: a red Solo cup is one hole.
Solo cup is one hole.
And the explanation is that if in a given area there's only one hole, one opening to the hole, then it is
It's under
one hole.
Hold on. I'm writing down. This is whole science, Mom. This is important. It has one hole. Two macaroni holes.
Macaroni hole. I'm sure there's an actual. I think it's a type of. I don't even know the engineering term. I wish I did. But any engineer would know what I'm trying to put down. I think.
Because it would be like, you can only go to one. But if you weren't,
There we go. I think these are our first laws. I'm gonna pin it.
We need to make it later, not now because you have to go. But later we need to define what a hole is. That is our next
Yeah.
task. Because before even being able to understand any of these laws, you must understand fundamentally what a hole is.
Yes, I agree.
Well,
You have to have whole definition. Okay, very well. For now, we can discuss this at length.
farewell. You may or may not be getting a link with all of this being recorded. It's science after
excellent.
all.
It's for science.
It's for the posterity of man.
Indeed.
The other
Well,
Ben is
Adios.
Adios.
Yeah. Ah!